There's one very big problem with nuclear that I think experts are pretty much ignoring. In fact, it's an enormous problem, and it is going to lead to potentially billions of dollars being completely wasted. Interestingly, that I know of, the only real company pointing out the big problem with nuclear, and they're doing it here in Australia, is actually Tesla. The government here in Australia, well, there's about to be an election, and the government that is essentially Republican, which is Liberals, they are proposing that if they get into power, they will transform Australia's energy grid from being one that's now around 50% renewables to being one dependent upon nuclear. A lot of people think this is a good idea. It's honestly insane considering the fact that Australia is one of the sunniest countries in the world. But the government says that's the solution. Tesla have fought back and they're saying, actually, this will hurt consumers. This will massively hurt consumers. In fact, consumers will actually lose hundreds of millions of dollars. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. Great to have you with us. Guys, if you're going to vote in the Australian election, I have not done this on the channel. It's been nearly 4 years, and I have not pulled for anyone publicly, but I'm doing it right now. Please don't vote for a Liberal. I strongly suggest it will be a huge mistake if you do that to Australia's economy. I'm not saying this because of some sort of emotional connection. Yes, I do care. I mean, my wife has stage 4 cancer, and I think that emissions from cars are certainly a part of the reason that people get cancer. And there's unquestionably a fact for that. So yeah, there is a part of that involved for sure. I admit that. But in spite of that, the science, the mathematics, the logic is all renewables. It makes sense. It's the cheapest form of energy. It's getting cheaper every year. And it's easy to build it out. You can build out an enormous battery, an enormous solar farm. If you want to go that way, I actually think the better direction to go is to empower households to have solar and batteries in their house by massively discounting them. The systems, which I think is going to happen soon, I think that's the best way to go about it, because then your grid's already there, right? You can feed electricity into the grid that already exists. Households can provide their own energy and just feed small amounts back into the grid. I think that's the perfect solution. But unfortunately, one side of government here who actually might win the election, they are going to put Australia in a very difficult economic position. Keep in mind that nuclear power plants never ever cost what companies say they're going to cost. Never. There's never been a nuclear power plant built in the Western world ever that has cost anywhere near the quoted price. In addition to that, they always take more than double the time quoted to actually build. If Australia did decide to build a nuclear power plant tomorrow, it would take at least 10 years. At least. That's best case scenario. 10 years is absolute best case scenario for that to be built in Australia. Meaning, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do between now, when coal power plants here in Australia are being turned off because they're losing money? The biggest coal power plant is not far from me. It's less than 100 kilometers away from my house. That's the biggest in Australia. It's about to be turned off, right? What are we going to do? Replace it with what? Well, I can tell you one thing we're replacing it with. The company that owns that power plant, the Eraring Power Station, they are going to get rid of it simply because it's an economic disaster. They're losing money. They're going to build the second biggest battery in the world in that exact location. In essence, the private market is telling the government what works, what makes money, how we can provide immediate solutions. Now, unfortunately, the government are just, for some reason, I'm not sure what it is. Is it vested interests? Are they just trying to be contrary? I don't know. What do you guys think? Unfortunately, this government, they are brainwashing Australians into believing that nuclear is the solution when it's absolutely not here in Australia. It could be in other countries. It's definitely not here. Nuclear is a complex technology to integrate into the power system, said Tesla, with constraints around ramping and load following, e.g. oscillating the pressurized reactor core, meaning it acts as a traditional baseload supply. Now, Tesla is saying that the government's plan here to build out enormous amounts of, nuclear power, in fact, more than 2 gigawatts of baseload for a country with only 25 million people, is actually a really bad idea. Now, the coalition have announced they're going to build out 2 gigawatts of baseload and an additional 14 gigawatts of always-on nuclear. You can't turn these nuclear power plants off. That's the issue here, right? Any large-scale build-out of this type of inflexible baseload supply will therefore be impacted by minimum generation levels, resulting in either low capacity factors for the nuclear plants and or unit decommitment, bidding out of the market or severe curtailment of cheaper rooftop solar and renewables. In other words, Australians, any electricity you send back into the grid, you won't be paid for that. You'll be penalized for that. That's inevitably what will have to happen because it'll just be completely wasted. Even the batteries won't be able to actually soak it all up. There won't be enough. Even though, yes, we're building out an insane amount of batteries over the next few years. I mean, who knows if the government cancels some of those contracts? They very well could if they get into power. But even those batteries won't be big enough to store all the excess energy we will eventually have. Because think about it. People won't stop installing solar panels. They make economic sense today, right? People are not going to stop on households. We've got more than 4 million households in Australia with their own solar. We've got millions of households installing batteries or that already have batteries. So really, by the time we actually have these nuclear power plants here in Australia, we're going to have probably all the energy we actually need. We're going to be adding all of this nuclear power in 10, 15 years time from now when batteries are even cheaper than what they are today, much cheaper than today. Solar will be much cheaper than what it is today. They're already the cheapest forms of energy, but they'll both be much cheaper. So by the time these power plants come online, what it means is your solar system won't be able to send electricity to the grid. It'll have to be turned off. You'll basically have to curtail your own solar, your own power. This will be the case for millions of households across Australia. If you create any excess generation of electricity, there'll be nowhere for it to go. I mean, think about it logically. Where's it going to go? When you can't turn nuclear off, where does it go? Now, right now, today, we can actually, with our fossil fuel power plants that we still have left, where they are running at a low level throughout the daytime. And that means they're making a loss. And that's part of the reason why they're being turned off, and they're also very old and inefficient. However, what that also means is that Australia is losing billions of dollars of electricity every year because we're curtailing it currently. We are just getting rid of it. With renewables, though, building all the new batteries out, and obviously if we start to have vehicle-to-grid with electric cars, that will become common. So a lot of people will just use their own vehicles to power their houses and solar systems. We actually, I think, with those solutions, we won't be destroying, getting rid of all this free electricity that we're generating during the day. We'll be able to save it up and use it during the nighttime. Now, that's assuming we don't build out this massive excess capacity, which I don't think we would. If we've got renewables, we can actually work out what we need, actually supply the market with what it needs. In certain locations, we can say, okay, look at this city needs this city needs that. That's logical, right? But if you start installing all these big nuclear power plants around Australia, just willy-nilly, massive amounts of power that the country doesn't actually need, it's a waste of money. And also it means consumers will lose out. You're going to have to pay for that power. You have to pay for that power. You'll have no choice. The Tesla submission emerges at the same time as industry body, the Smart Energy Council, and Federal Climate and Energy Minister Chris Bowen warn that rooftop solar systems could be curtailed by more than 60% of the time to accommodate the planned fleet of nuclear power plants. Now, I don't believe this is scaremongering from the government saying this. The government say things to freak out people, to try and get them to vote for them. And the coalition are framing that as that's what this is. But it is simply true. It's logical. There's no other alternative. What else are they going to do? They're going to have to be turned off. I think actually Chris Bowen, the current minister in Australia, is underestimating. I think 60% of the time is going to be an underestimation. I think honestly solar will be turned off, period. I don't think we'll be able to feed anything back into the grid. There just won't be anywhere for it to go. And realistically, they also say that there is little room for large fleets of baseload power plants, given that the output of rooftop solar has already reduced operational demand to new lows of around 10 gigawatts. So operational demand, right, is already at a new low of 10 gigawatts. And the coalition is saying that in 10 or 15 years from now, we'll need an additional 14 gigawatts. We've already got massive amounts. We're getting huge amounts of solar and batteries being built out every year. And for the next 15 years, the government are assuming nothing will be built out in Australia. No more energy will be added to the grid, even though this is impossible because we need it now. And that by 2035 or 2040, when these nuclear power plants are ready to be turned on, the grid will somehow be capable of just accepting 14 gigawatts of power. It's mathematically insane. It just doesn't add up. And this is the same problem that many countries are facing. In fact, it's why the French government recently admitted to the fact that nuclear has been a mistake. I'm not making that up. You can Google that for yourself if you don't believe me. The French government have admitted that they have made a mistake with some of their nuclear power plants and that other countries need to have a look at what they've done and learn from their mistakes. So we're hearing all this stuff now from the media. I don't know what sections of the media about nuclear being the future. However, a lot of it is emotion. A lot of it is not very factual. It's not saying to consumers, okay, guys, you have a gap in this area here, in this city, where you need this much nuclear power. This is what we're going to build out because this is what's going to fit in. By the time this plant comes online in 2037 or whenever it's going to be, right? Or by the time these small modular nuclear reactors ever get built, if they ever do, we haven't seen any yet that are really being commercialized, then this is how much power we're going to need in this city, and this is how it's going to work. It's how it's going to integrate into the grid, right? Here are the mathematics. Here's the logic. Here's how it stacks up. But none of them are doing that. There's no logical plans from these companies, from these governments making these claims that nuclear is the answer on how they're actually going to integrate it into the grid. This is the big challenge. Baseload is continuously being displaced by cheaper renewables, said Tesla, in particular rooftop solar, with this baseload demand reducing year by year, said Tesla. That's the key. Baseload demand is reducing year by year. So in other words, the coalition government in Australia are saying baseload demand will increase significantly in Australia when the facts, obviously, as Tesla mentions, are the complete inverse, the complete opposite of that. Now, Tesla says that this reflects widespread industry observations that the concept of baseload is being replaced by a focus on supply and demand flexibility. So they said, as a low-cost wind, solar and storage continues to scale, there is a diminishing role for inflexible baseload assets as the load duration curve will compress down and displace baseload generation. We are already seeing this acutely in the smaller grid of Western Australia, where high penetration solar is challenging the economic operation of baseload coal plants, and the SWIS would not be able to support a large high capacity baseload generator like nuclear now or even in the coming decades. This is expected within the wider electricity market all across Australia, says Tesla, in the next few years, as low marginal cost renewables continue to penetrate the system and drive down prices. Now, it would sound like Tony Seba is speaking here, isn't it? This is what Seba said 10 years ago. Low marginal cost renewables would penetrate the system and drive down prices. And this is absolutely what we're going to see. Over the next 10 years, as these nuclear power plants are in the approval phases, if they actually get approved to be built, and as the Australian population invests enormous sums of money into them that we don't have. We have the highest ever debt ratio at this point in time, the Australian population, highest debt to GDP we've ever had before. As we decide we build these nuclear power plants we don't need, by the time they're actually built out, well, guess what? Vehicle to grid will be common. There will be thousands and thousands of owners all across Australia that have electric cars with 80 kilowatt hour batteries, on average 60 kilowatt hour batteries. That's essentially 4 Tesla Powerwalls sitting in their driveways. Think about it. Most homes now have 2 electric cars. Most of the time, people actually work from home. They work at school, they work all different times, and they very commonly can actually have their cars plugged into their solar systems. And guess what? It's free to charge. And then with vehicle to grid, they can send that electricity back into their houses at night time when they get back from work between 6 to 9 p.m. to 6 to 10 p.m. at night time when they need that electricity. That will solve a lot of the growth in the electricity market we're going to see. As more EVs need more power, that's the solution. We already have all these solar panels sitting on our roofs. By the time 5 to 10 years from now, that 4 million will hit 5 or 6 million solar systems around Australia. And that is the solution. Actually, it's households. You don't need these enormous nuclear power plants. Peter Dutton's nuclear power plant includes at least 700 megawatt of nuclear power capacity in the town of Collie, where the existing aging coal-fired generators are already being replaced by some of the world's biggest batteries. So basically Western Australia is saying, okay, you're going to build this nuclear power plant for what purpose? We don't need it. Those batteries are being built because rooftop solar is already reaching shares of 85% of total demand and completely eroding the engineering and economic case for baseload. Now, there's people in the wind sector as well, sunk cost bias. They believe the only solution to baseload is actually wind and that solar can't work with batteries. But Saudi Arabia says, actually, guys, you're high. You're high on your own supply. In other words, you're high on your own ideas. That's not true. The reality is baseload doesn't have to be wind, it doesn't have to be nuclear, it doesn't have to be coal. It can be batteries that can work as baseload. In South Australia, where the coalition also wants to build a nuclear reactor, or even two, rooftop solar has reached a peak of 113% of state demand, with the surplus being exported to Victoria or stored in big batteries. In fact, South Australia is saying, without any assistance from the federal government, they will hit 100% renewables by the end of next year. Why then does the government think they need to go and build nuclear power plants in a state that is 100% renewables and doesn't even need them? It's insane. Given Australia's world-leading solar and wind resources and leading rates of rooftop solar PV, the power system's minimum operating demand threshold becomes an upper ceiling for baseload supply to operate the power system in a secure and reliable state, says Tesla. Increasing renewable penetration at these times further displaces baseload generation, reducing capacity factors and increasing the cost of supplying energy to consumers. It is increasingly difficult to operate a single 1 gigawatt baseload generator in New South Wales or Queensland, with the power systems in South Australia, Tasmania, Victoria, and WA not able to support that level of baseload generation. Reneweconomy.com.au, who shared this information on their website and wrote a brilliant article, I'll put a link to it, have explained that assuming an 85% capacity factor, this represents at most 15 terawatt hours, less than 6% of Australia's energy market net demand in 2040 at higher generation costs, which would simply increase prices to consumers pointlessly. Increasing baseload generation capacity above this would require baseload generation to operate as a mid-range generator, reducing their power output during the day and overnight, which decreases capacity factors, increases technical risks, and the cost of generation. Smart Australians who actually have this information and have read this information and haven't been brainwashed by, vested interests, they know this, and I'm sure they'll vote for the side of government that actually is being logical here, is making the right decision. Now, if you are tied to a certain ideology, a certain way of thinking, a certain side of politics, well, you'll do what you want to do, and you're emotional about your decisions. You often pretend you're not, but you are. Now, I've presented the facts here, and if you want any more facts, I can share them with you. Now, these batteries coming from these big companies are guaranteed to last for 30 years. That's the warranty these companies are providing. The batteries won't last for 2 years, as these myths are being basically perpetuated by the media at this point in time. So if your argument is to say, well, batteries don't last, so they can't solve this issue, well, actually, they do. In fact, EV batteries and energy storage batteries last much, much longer than even the most hardcore electric car fans have been claiming. I'll do a video on that issue very soon. Thanks for watching.